Well, welcome to the Mental Stillness Podcast. Today I have a friend, Kim Botto, here, who I'm just really excited you're here, Kim.
Me too.
This is
Me
fun.
Too.
I've been looking. This has been on the calendar and circled. Excited to talk.
I'm so happy to be sitting in the same room with you.
Likewise, and we're gonna jump in, and the conversation's gonna weave in and out of different topics and free flowing, and but definitely going to highlight a big undertaking that you did with a specific book that may be. I feel like QVC for 6 easy payments. It could be yours in digital or hard copy. But we do need an audiobook version of you speaking it. Is that coming?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Love it. But Kim, won't you introduce yourself and let's start there. Let's hear a little bit about who you are, about the project, what you're up to kind of these days.
Okay. I'm Kim Botto. I'm a friend of Derek's. I am a mom of 5, a grandma of, just as of last week, 11. So that
Congratulations.
Thank you. So that's a super fun thing. I started out working in corporate America and then really felt called to ministry. And so for decades, 30 plus decades, I led kids and student ministry.
30 decades?
Oh, 30 decades. That would be. Oh, wait. 3 decades, 30 years. I combined. Yeah, for over 3 decades, or over 30 years.
Just
Thank
fact
you.
checking, you know?
See, this is what I love. You guys, this is me and Derek. He will interpret what I am saying. Thank you. I led kids and student ministry in the local church. And after doing that, I really felt like I wanted to be in closer proximity to kids and youth who needed an advocate. And so I worked for a local Cincinnati nonprofit with multi-system involved youth, meaning they were all under the care of Child Protective Services, and many were involved with juvenile justice. And so, but now, I just wrote a book because there are so many places, kids who aren't typical, which is actually most of the kids, Derek, they're misunderstood. They don't fit in. They're on the outside of the circle. And so my hope is that through this book that people would increase their empathy towards people, especially kids and teens who are different, that they would have new strategies to engage with them so that no matter how your brain's wired or no matter how your body functions, that you've got a place to belong and contribute, care for others, and be cared for too.
You know, after reading it and obviously like knowing you for some time, like I know this is a personal work, and I loved so many of the stories that were in there, and we're going to touch on some of those.
Okay.
You don't know which ones I'm going to touch on yet, but you know, kind of zooming out, you know, like when you think about the early days of dreaming about this project, a lot went into this. So like, why is this topic so personal to you?
Oh, well, I have a nephew who's in his 20s who's autistic, and I watched him struggle to find belonging and find his people, which he has. Also, my husband and I adopted our 2 youngest, one at the age of 10 and one at the age of 15, from an orphanage in Ukraine. And because of their background, they responded different than the kids who grew up in our home since birth. And I realized then that it didn't make any difference how safe our environment was. They still didn't feel safe because everything that happened to them, and people were judging them based on their behavior, where really if they had to just stop and got to know them, they would understand more of why they behaved. Then also when working in the church, as far as why I'm so passionate about it, we got kids who were kicked out of other places, kicked out of other churches, which just makes me it makes me angry and it makes me sad.
All the emotions, yeah.
All the feels, all the emojis. And I wanted to help other churches and other organizations be a place where truly every child and teen can belong and find their place. And it's not about fixing the child. It's about us looking at our environment, and maybe there are things, there are things in our environment that we can change to make it more accessible and more of a safe place for everybody.
For me, as a parent and working with a lot of kids over the years, teenagers, whatever, there's like a I don't know if it's an implicit message in the book or an intentional one, or maybe just my interpretation of it. I like this idea of understanding what's the child's role and what's my role as the caretaker, and getting clarity on that, because I think that gets confusing sometimes. And like you said before in the example, it's so easy for that behavior to be front and center and to miss out on a lot of other things. And so I want to start with the role of the caretaker parent, and specifically a story you talked about in the book is with Anastasia and maybe perhaps being a bit late to pick her up from school.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Tell me a little bit about how that has, I don't know, that whole story, if you can share the story, but then also how has that informed you of like, what's the adult's role in helping care for kids?
Well, I still have some parent guilt over that occasionally. But Anastasia had been home just a couple months, and she was going to our local elementary school. And I don't know, Derek, do your schools have early dismissal days?
They do.
Oh my gosh. I hate them because you forget. You've got your routines. And it came around time to pick her up, and I was baking cookies for her, so I was doing something for her, and I didn't pick her up. And when I realized, I rushed up to school. I wasn't that late. I mean, there were still kids, mingling around in the front yard of the school. But Anastasia was standing with a teacher, and Anastasia was hysterical. And the teacher said to me, I don't know why she's so upset. It's not like you just drop her off and never come back. And man, my blood started to boil. I mean, I'm thinking all these things like, you have no right to determine whether or not my child's response is valid or not. Number two, do you know anything about her history? I mean, she's only been in this school for a couple months. She barely speaks English. She's
You're like, I sure hope you don't know the background to have that response, right?
Right. I mean, she's obviously lived somewhere else. She hasn't lived with us her whole life. And her mother didn't come back, her birth mother. So in Anastasia's mind, she wasn't sure. As she stood there, she wasn't sure that I was going to come back. And even though that teacher knew, her friends in school who knew me, her little fourth grade friends, they knew, Anastasia did not know with confidence that I would be back. And that's why she was so upset. And I use that example a lot as when I'm talking to educators. There's always something underneath the behavior. So we as adults, it's our responsibility to be compassionate and curious and dig beneath. I don't know if this teacher asked her any questions, or it's not even about asking questions. It's about, Anastasia, I know you're really upset right now. Name the feelings. I know you're feeling really sad. Anastasia, it seems like you're scared. And I am going to stay with you until your mother comes. What would make you feel good right now? Do you want to try to call her on the phone? Do you want to? But responding to Anastasia with, why are you crying? Everything's fine. I mean, she's crying. Obviously, everything is not fine. And I think that translates to leading adults, as bosses. I was talking to a leader the other day who said, well, this is just the way I lead. Well, I don't know, Derek, you've led a lot of people. You lead some people differently than others based on what their unique needs are.
That story resonated there's so many parts, and back to the original question of like, what's the role of the caretaker? It's from that story you could pull out, okay, well, advocacy, and you didn't mention there, like even pulling her aside,
Right.
specifically. And I'm going to read a section of the book that I think highlights several pieces of advocacy, but then also on the back end, because you still had some, you left with Anastasia and you were going to process that experience.
I had some work
with
to
her.
do.
Yeah. And so here's kind of what you said in the book. Anastasia's my daughter. Because her birth mother did not come back, it's not your place to determine if my daughter's reaction's valid or not. Then I turned and grabbed Anastasia's hand, and we went home and ate the cookies you were baking before. I reassured her that while I may at times be late, I will always be there eventually. I love the tone in that book of curiosity, possibility, but then, there's several words in there when I read it, I felt like it was intentional. Like, well, maybe this was happening, or perhaps this, it's really not assuming, making those assumptions, which are always traps.
Right. Always.
Assuming the best. And so I guess speak into that part of when you're thinking about dealing with, maybe you do see a big behavior. I don't know, how do you feel like assuming the best in that situation, again, from the role of the adult, how is that beneficial?
Well, Dr. Ross Greene, who I love, he wrote The Explosive Child. He's written a bunch of great books. He says, children, this might not be the exact quote, but this is the gist of it. Children do well when they can. So if we see a kid who is what they're doing doesn't meet our expectations, if we're thinking that, oh, wait a minute, they would do well if they could. They didn't wake up thinking I'm going to ruin Kim's day. They didn't think there's something going on. So when we know that, when we approach a situation with that, then we as the adult or the leader are going to look for ways that we can help that person perform to their fullest potential in the situation that we're in right now, or discover what is the unmet need, or maybe there's a skill deficit. I know when, I've led teams, and sometimes somebody will, an employee will have a big meltdown, and I have asked them to do something that they simply don't have the skills to do. So then I can come alongside them and help them either develop those skills or maybe find somebody else on the team that can partner with them. But if I just go in saying, they didn't even try, this is horrible. Well, that's not helpful to anybody. Yeah. And it puts me in a really horrible mood.
And it may be more of an indictment on your leadership style.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's why the way in which and our posture, all the pre-work leading up to that coaching conversation sets the stage if you're a safe person for them to say, hey, I struggle with this. Or,
yes.
I'm not good at that.
Derek, that's a great point. So if somebody is doing a project and they don't have the skills for it, if they haven't told you, then as the leader, I need to be looking in the mirror and going, exactly what you said. Why weren't they comfortable telling me they don't know how to use that particular app or software?
Yeah. Where did I get in the way here in this situation? And
that's why you're such a good leader, Derek.
It's there's been situations I've not done that, and that's a hard reality to, talk about mom guilt, leadership guilt too. I mean, that's a real thing. And I when you talk about assuming the best, just from a psychological standpoint, I am a huge proponent of Carl Rogers and his whole unconditional positive regard. I love that. And it's you're assuming the value and worth in somebody else, regardless, with no judgment, regardless of their behavior or their conditions has to earn that. It's like, no, unconditional positive regard. I don't know the full story. I've not walked their shoes.
Right.
And that's such a posture that doesn't always come natural, but it has to be intentional.
Yes.
We got to pick that up every day because we got our own biases and
yeah, we do.
Start creeping in and we get triggered.
Yeah, we do.
So.
And you saying it doesn't come naturally, I think no matter what our age, I'm old. I've been around a lot of years.
300 decades.
300 decades. Yeah.
Or 30 decades.
That's right. I still have things to learn. I don't know it all. And when we don't have that posture, when we have the opposite, we're going to miss all kinds of clues out there about the people that we're interacting with.
Yeah, yeah. So then you're in this situation. We're talking about roles of caretaker, adult, leader, whoever it is. There is a dynamic there to where we ourselves can get some of our own unresolved stuff, call it trauma, call it immaturity, bubbles up.
Right.
And kind of like marriage is a magnifying glass to our stuff, parenting is. And so we start to parenting or leading kids. And so I know you have a section in the book pretty early on that kind of jumped into the trauma piece, which is so important. Let's talk a little bit of that from a standpoint of how that could potentially play out in the child and or the caretaker on either side. Trauma could be on both sides of that just complicates any situation.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great book, The Body Keeps the Score, which, yeah, of course you read it, that talks about things that happen to us live in us and then affect our reactions to events in the future. And so understanding that when a kid experiences trauma or anybody experiences trauma, it's then going to impact, if you're in a similar situation in the future, it's going to impact how you respond. Or, like, I'll give an example with one of our daughters, Sasha, who lived in an orphanage for a number of years, and she had to be hypervigilant all the time. Like, for her survival, she believed that she constantly needed to be knowing what was going on. So when she went to her new high school, she had a really, really hard time focusing. Now, she could tell me, for her classes that were in the front of the building, she could tell me all of the deliveries that were made and when they were made. She could tell me what teachers left their classrooms because she was aware of all of that. Now, a teacher looking at her might think, well, she's just choosing not to pay attention. Well, she's just, or she has some undiagnosed ADHD or something like that. Well, no, it's because of her past. The way she's going to respond in a situation is she's constantly going to be looking all around her to make sure that she's safe.
It's such a good point. An adaptive skill that allowed her to survive. That worked in a different season of life. And maybe now it's not as necessary or needed, but that was my go-to for so long. And
right.
You're asking someone who's still developing, like, hey, drop that used to work for you. Mm-hmm. You don't need that anymore. It's like, but we do it more harsh than that. It's like trauma is so, and into adulthood, we carry that stuff.
Oh, I had an employee that I worked with that whenever I would give her coaching to develop in certain areas, she would cry, like every time. Finally, what we discovered is her mother was hypercritical of her, hypercritical. I was close in age to her mom, way different than her mom, but close in age. So whenever I gave her any kind of guidance or coaching, she immediately thought, I'm a loser, I'm terrible, she thinks I'm not competent. And so once we uncovered that, then I knew that when I talked to her, I needed, before I even brought up anything like that, needed to establish, I am for you. I want you to succeed. Here are some things we can work on together. And it made all the difference in the world. But it took months. I'm like, and sometimes it was like very simple things that we were talking about, but it would crush her. And it's because she was carrying on. I mean, she was carrying how she had interacted with a woman of a similar age of me in the past. And she thought,
you're going to be the same.
That's right. That's right. And so I had to adapt. As the leader, I had to adapt. I couldn't say to her, well, you need to change. Like, I'm not your mother. Why are you acting like that? Instead, with a very few, it only took a couple seconds to just establish that foundation before every conversation and then go into the things that we were going to work on together. And you can help them then uncover what's underneath their responses. Because this person that I'm talking about, she didn't realize that that's what she was doing. I have a thing with, I don't think we've ever been on an escalator before. I have a thing with escalators. My heart rate goes up. I get anxious. My palms sweat. When I got my new Apple Watch, I would watch, my heart rate. And as I would approach an escalator, my heart rate would go up. And my dad, just in passing one time, said something about the time my shoe got cut in the escalator and somebody had to help, and I was just a toddler. And once my dad told me that, I still don't love escalators, but I know, wait a minute, my shoe's not going to get caught. I don't even have shoelaces on today. I'm going to be fine. But I think that's an example of things from our past greatly impact how we look at situations right now in the present. Yeah.
And, trauma encourages people for avoidance behaviors. And so we start to avoid people who look like someone else. And so it messes up everybody differently. And I see sometimes to where there's an assumption of like, okay, they went through said event, therefore they're traumatized. It's also something on the other side that's, overused.
Right.
There's a difference in experiencing a traumatic event and being traumatized.
Right. Yeah. And I talk about that some of the book as far as, a kid doesn't make the soccer team. And people go, the parent, she's just traumatized. It was such a trauma. Well, no, it wasn't.
Yeah.
She's embarrassed. She's embarrassed. Her name wasn't on the list.
what's
She's feeling left
behind
out.
that?
Yeah, but she's not traumatized. Because when we overuse the term, then we minimize what people are really experiencing when they truly are traumatized.
Yeah. Being exposed to traumatic events is far more common than being traumatized. Like, 60% of us are going to go through traumatic events in our life, but only 10% roughly, and that's on the high end, are actually going to be clinically traumatized. And so, but you never know. It could be the same thing you and I see traumatizes you, but doesn't traumatize me. But yet I walk away and I'm like, I suck it up. It didn't affect me, Kim.
Yeah, but and I know that you know this, part of that, like if it doesn't affect you, but it affects me, it might be due to, the people who are traumatized are the ones who don't have good support groups around them, who don't have, and I don't mean like a formal support group, I mean safe adults, safe people. So what we can look at then is we can be the safe adult for somebody. We can be the one that they can talk and that they can process it with. Whereas if they then in the future experience a similar event, then maybe it won't have the negative impact it had on them in the past.
Yeah. I love that language of even back to the role of the adult, the caretaker, like, hey, I get the honor, and use that word strategically, to be a safe place to process. And I'm going to really take a side road because I love this is really fascinating when you think about, when you think about the education and even just the verbiage around PTSD, start with warfare.
Right.
And World War II, people were less traumatized statistically than Vietnam. And the wild thing I learned in this was when people left World War II, they got on a ship and spent 30 days processing with people who experienced it with them.
Yes.
After Vietnam, they got on a plane, they were home the next day.
Yeah.
So the process time wasn't there. And I'm like, to this context, like, man, we get to intentionally be in that process time with people. I think it's an important role clarity piece for us to kind of carry and to keep in, it's an honor.
Right. And I think also looking at when they did get off the ship from World War II, they had people around them that were safe places to process and that were encouraging them. That was not the case for Vietnam veterans. A lot of them didn't even want to admit that they'd been in Vietnam.
Yeah.
So, so many things play into that.
There was a parade after World War II. There wasn't that after.
There was not a parade. No, there wasn't.
So many things in there. There's, I think, really interesting. And you talked about before around this. This was in the book, and I want to read it because I think it is really insightful. The most traumatic aspect of the trauma a child experiences is typically not the actual event, but the damage done to their connections with the important people in their life. When they lose connection, the world becomes a scary and a confusing place, and they believe that others are not safe. And so I can't remember if that was a quote or whatever, but I think that it's that connection after that trauma that's important.
Yeah, that's Bruce Perry's work, who has done amazing work in the area of trauma. And I mean, he's a psychiatrist, psychologist. So before he became famous writing books, he made his money in therapy. However, he says that the place that people heal are in the context of relationship, not in therapy. We need relationships. We need people around us to listen to us. And as the adult or the caretaker, it's not about coming up with profound things to say. It's really about sitting and listening and empathizing. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you how many times, I say, and I mean it when I say it, but, I'll say, that just sounds so hard. Sometimes that's all somebody needs to hear because they think that they're crazy. And I don't use that term lightly, but they think there's something wrong with their mind that it's so hard. And someone just recognizing, no, what you're going through is really hard. I mean, we were talking about earlier, raising little bitty kids. Once you realize, oh, wait a minute, when I have 3 kids under 3, it's just hard. There's not something wrong with my parenting. There's not something wrong with my kids. This is just a hard season right now.
Yeah. Accepting that reality.
Yes.
Of course, I'm peaked in this emotion that I'm sleep deprived. Of course I am.
Right.
You know, like taking the behaviors of children and some of those triggers, it's so easy to take that personal, especially if we're hungry, angry, lonely, tired,
Right.
stressed, whatever it is. Like we can be very vulnerable when one of those behaviors happen, and all of a sudden we're in a spot where it's very easy to take it personal. So how do you consult, coach, give advice to people to what do they do with that?
Well, for one, I think we have to have this mantra that we say over and over again. It's not about me. Mm-hmm. It's not about me. It's not about me. It's not about me. When someone reacts or responds, because we're kind of self-centered, Derek, you know?
Don't you put that on me.
Yeah, don't receive it. Don't receive it. Because we just automatically think, oh, I must have said something. I must have done something.
Yeah.
And often it has nothing to do with us. And one of the examples I give in the book is Sasha, her first Mother's Day. I thought, this is going to be amazing.
Tell that story.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got all 5 kids in the same house, on the same continent for the first time ever. She'd only been home for a couple months, less than that at that point. And I'm thinking, this is going to be amazing because she has this awesome, attentive mother to celebrate. And I say that tongue in cheek, but I thought it was going to be a great day. And she gave me a lovely card to begin with. And the day just went downhill from then. I mean, she was sassy, she was nasty. And because I took it personally, I'm like, here I am, have worked my tail off to get you here, to be your mother. And now you're being a big crab with me on the day that's supposed to be about me. I mean, I actually went to my room and I thought, it's Mother's Day, I can do whatever I want. So I went to my room. And as I reflected on it later, and as she and I continued to talk about things, not specifically about Mother's Day, but about things, she had another mom. She had a birth mom. And so the way she was acting towards me was not about me. She was thinking about a mom, all those years that she didn't have a mom to celebrate. And once I took it personally, I couldn't be of any assistance to her at all because it was all about me. And so gosh, if I could have had a redo, I would have said, of course. I would have realized in my head, of course Mother's Day is hard for her. So I could have said something like, gosh, I bet this is hard, thinking of your mom. And her mom was alive, but she'd lost all rights. And but I didn't do that because it was all about me.
A quote you said in there, as the adults in the relationship, it's our responsibility. I think it's also an honor. There's our honor word. To look beyond the behavior and help the child identify the need without taking their behavior personally. And then later on, you go on to say, when we start taking it personally, we can lose sight of our actual goal, an opportunity to receive love and care from people.
Yeah.
Any adult who's been a caretaker, a parent, like we all have this stuff bubble up. Like that's normal. Like you said, of course.
Right.
Of course that she's feeling that kind of way. I think we need to stay curious with why was that triggering to me?
Absolutely.
And how do maybe I need some unprofessional or some professional kind of work on that, because that's some unresolved stuff that's popping up for a reason. And it's interesting to where when you think about some of the things that kids' behaviors trigger in us, it's a lot of times because we, for whatever reason, we put ourselves and our story and our skills and our life experience into their current shoes. And you're like, why can't you see it this way? If you did that, we go into problem-solving fixing mode, right? And we try to do that, but it's like that's your stuff, not their stuff, and all that. And so I just think sometimes if we are personally triggered, it's like let us stay curious and be gracious with ourselves too, to be like, hey, that's something that I probably need to work on, and I don't need to work on that right now with this kid.
Right.
This is a more reflection on me. How do I prioritize myself and that stuff in some other appropriate setting? Me raising my voice to this kid may not be the best way to process that.
Well, and I think one of the ways we don't take it personally is to have people around us that remind us what the goal is.
Yeah.
Or I had a teen that I had and continue to have a close relationship with that she said, how did she say it? You remind me who I am when I forget. So I think having people around us, if someone has said something that then makes us feel not valued or not worthy or incompetent, have people around us go, well, no, like you can do this, and you are in the right position. You're very well qualified for this position. You have a team around you.
The behavior triggers me in some. Let's say this is with a child. Behavior triggers you in some kind of way, and you feel disrespected and whatever. Is there a world where that can be a normal conversation you have with the kid, and you're like, hey, this is the way I felt. Like I'm not proud that's where I went, but that's where I went, and I just want you to know that's kind of where I'm at in processing it. What would you say to normalizing the fact that you're also human in your own emotions?
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, and that's called repair. If we have screamed or yelled or said something we regret, not just to a kid, but to a coworker too. I've said plenty of things I regret, where then we go back and say, hey, I've been thinking about it. Or maybe it's, hey, can we talk about this together? Because I responded in a way that was not honoring to you. Absolutely. Too often, we just go off in our little hole and we just want to forget about it or stuff it down. And you know what happens to stuff we stuff down? It gets moldy and smelly, and it's going to come out in unattractive ways. So absolutely. And with kids, it depends on the age that they are. But even with a kid as young as a 2-year-old, if we lose our temper and yell, we can go back and say, I was really hungry and tired, and I yelled at you, and I should not have yelled at you. Will you forgive me? And then, because I didn't do that with my kids. I wish I had. But now working with parents, then you teach your child to forgive you, and not just I forgive you, but mommy, I forgive you for yelling at me. I mean, specifically, you want to name what you're forgiving them for. Otherwise, it just becomes a really trite. I forgive you. But actually call out the thing that you're forgiving them for. And kids can do that at a very young age. And then what they're learning is, I'm not going to be perfect. I'm going to mess up. And when I mess up, I can go back to that individual and attempt to make it right.
That's so practical. I mean, it's so easy to go to the spot of like the power differential. I'm the parent. I should have this stuff figured out. Now I got to pretend like I do. Save face.
That's exhausting.
You can't hold it up.
And you can also ask, how can I make it right? Maybe, I don't know if you've ever done this, Derek, but I've grounded my child until, okay, you're grounded forever and no more screens, and that's ridiculous. So then go back and say, okay, there needs to be a consequence, apologize. And then, however, there was a behavior that there needs to be a consequence for. Let's work together and figure out something more reasonable than you having to stay into your room until you're 25. Yeah.
Yeah. It models, like you said, it shows them that it's not about being perfect, but it's about taking responsibility, or whatever the kind of lessons that are part of that. And I know sometimes it's, again, like, especially if adults aren't comfortable in processing their own emotions, it can be that we talked about avoidance earlier. It's so easy to just avoid, well, you're the one that should have done that. That's the reason that's the reason the vacation was ruined, or this, whatever. This is why we can't ever go to IKEA again.
Shame is not a helpful strategy.
Shame isn't, no. But it's interesting. Marcus Aurelius, and I might be paraphrasing this, he said, what stands in the way often becomes the way.
Oh, that's good.
And I like that. If you're thinking about even just a certain behavior or emotions, like instead of me avoiding talking about that or pretending like it's not there on the caretaker side, how do I lean into that and say, what you saw earlier, I think I was sad. I think I can lean into that a little bit. And all of a sudden that becomes a way, and to use his words, toward connection or to repair.
Yes.
And so I think just as a practical thing, we all can do that in corporate America or hopefully also in our house.
Right. And a great tool for that is to get a feelings wheel, a feelings chart. If you work with kids or if you have kids, there's great feelings charts that have the word and then also have an image of it. So a kid that might not be able to read every word, and it helps them as they're going through these things. Like you said, going to somebody and say, I was mad or tired.
Yeah.
It increases your feelings vocabulary and then helps our kids do that too.
What's a starting point or a next step that feels doable that would be maybe the most healthy next step for people?
I think be curious. When you see situations or people behaving in a way that you don't understand, be curious to try to dig underneath the behavior. Have conversations with people that you don't understand their behavior. Talk to them about it. I mean, one of the things I see in with people who work with kids is they have in their mind the way a kid should behave, and they're so rigid in that. There's no flexibility. So another thing I would say is be flexible. Be open to new ideas and new ways of doing things, rather than, if a kid cusses in church, rather than immediately go to punishment. I mean, get to know them and figure out what is underneath it, because our goal isn't elimination of profanity. So I think that's a first step. I'll put this as the first step. Figure out what your goals are. What are you trying to do? And if it's with a group of kids, maybe you're trying to build relationship. Maybe you're trying to, if you're a school teacher, there's certain things that you want to teach them. I think before that, you want to make sure that your space is safe. That would be the case with, if you're in corporate America, you want your spaces to feel safe so people can admit when they do things wrong. So figure out what your goals are, and then look at where are the gaps. Where am I not meeting those? And what are some steps that I can take to do that? And if you're working with adults, work with the adults to figure that out. There's great assessments. Five dysfunctions of a team, which I think we were together and we did that.
Lencioni?
Yes. That is such a great assessment to figure out where you are. Because before you, everybody says this, but before you figure out where you're going to go, you got to figure out what your starting point is. Mm-hmm. So talk to the team.
Yeah.
Observe the kids that you're working with.
You tell that story in the book to where you had a volunteer at some point where you had to split ways because they were very concrete in their mind as far as bad kids are always going to be bad kids.
Right.
And so it's like this also sets the stage to there needs to be some very hard conversations and accountability and, yes, coaching and grace and all that, but it's probably going to put you in some situations where you are going to have to pull that teacher aside and say, that's not your place to determine that for my child.
But what an honor to do that. Mm-hmm. If somebody is serving, whether it be in a role where they're employed or a role where they're volunteering, if they're serving in a place that's constantly making them agitated and frustrated, we get to help them discover, okay, what's the thing that's agitating and frustrating you here? What's the thing that you really love? And help them then move into something that's going to be a lot more fulfilling and in line with their temperament and gifts and abilities. That's not a bad thing.
That's a great thing.
Yeah. There's been a number of people that I have worked with that it's not working out in the position that they have. And I have maintained great relationships because we work together to figure out what they really do love doing. Mm-hmm. And if it's not where they are, well, let's help them find someplace.
Do you have any practical examples of where you feel like, man, this organization or this church and they're just doing it well?
People who are doing it well are places where we've already talked about. It's a safe place. Employees can be open. They can talk to, there's always going to be a hierarchy, but no matter where you are in the hierarchy, you're going to take feedback from anybody on your team, and people are going to feel safe to give that to you. We before we got on here, we talked about that, the importance of taking feedback from all members of the team. because depending on where they are, they're going to observe things that you may never observe that actually cause the organization to be not great. I mean, even toxic. So I think being a safe place, having leaders who are willing to be flexible, because again, I mean, as a leader, our job is to do whatever we can to help somebody reach their full potential. So that means that we might have to adjust how we do things. I mean, the organization that you and I work with together, I used email as my to-do list. And when I had something that I wanted somebody to look up for me, or, I'd send them an email at all hours of the day and night. And finally, somebody told me, and sometimes I would send it to people who were there's several levels in between. What I didn't realize is that was making people nervous. They're like, oh my gosh, it's 11:30 on a Saturday, but I need to stop and get this information for her. I didn't need to do that. So somebody on the team taught me I knew how to do it, I just didn't use it. Suggested I use schedule for my emails, so I'd only send emails during work hours. Also, every time a thought popped into my head, I didn't reach out to somebody. I made a list. And I had one-on-ones regularly with people. And so most of the things weren't urgent. So I think looking at ourselves as leaders on how we can best care for our team and lead them, and then be open. I could have gotten angry at somebody going, you are making people nervous and people are spending their Saturday night looking up this data for you that you really don't need on a Saturday night. So I think a leader, and I'm not perfect in this. I get mad at people when they say stuff, but I think a leader who takes feedback.
And I like that from regardless of your intention, it can have an impact on people. And like I could see the other side of it. Well, I'm not texting them. I could be texting them this stuff, but they'll look at it when they log in, but they're seeing the timestamp, right? And so it's like, but you taking that feedback and okay, I can see how that could come across.
But you say, okay, I could say I'm emailing. They'll just look at it when they log in. Well, if they see me on my email all the time, I am modeling to them that they need to be on their email all the time.
Setting that precedent,
yes.
Or setting the expectation.
Yes.
Typically, like, are people coming across your path because there's some specific reoccurring challenges that they're facing? There's like, I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. Help me out. Help us out. Like, how are they coming across to you?
Well, because my passion is kids that don't fit in, kids and teens who don't fit in, that's a lot of the people who come to me will be challenges with a kid or a teen that isn't doing what they expect. And so often what I find is, I'm curious, I'll ask a bunch of questions. And so often in the asking of the questions, you'll say something like, yeah, well, when grandma drops them off every day, I'm going, oh, so tell me more about their home life. Well, they got a great home life. Like, grandma and grandpa are awesome. And I'm like, well, where's mom and dad? Well, I'm not sure where mom is. She's around sometimes. And dad's in prison now because,
But home life's great.
But home life's great.
Yeah.
So I think it's looking for the people who come to me are having often challenges with kids. And the first response is to just be curious and figure out what might be underneath that need. For complex problems, there aren't simple strategies. It's layered, and it starts with getting to know the person and building a relationship. And I think too often, especially with kids who are not behaving in the way that we want them to, we can make assumptions. We can, make diagnosis. Mm-hmm. Oh, that kid needs to be on, because they're ADHD. And we need to not do that. We need to take a big old deep breath, realize it's going to take some time and that people are worth the investment, and ask questions, not as an interrogator, but as a caring, compassionate human to another human. I want to know about you.
Yeah. Asking questions and resisting that predetermined, I already know the answer.
Right. Oh, that's hard. Oh, that's a hard thing to do.
I'm going to ask this because it's our policy, but
I already know.
I know you got this going on. So
I think also when we ask the question, what I have, because I've had to do this myself, ask follow-up questions. So often we ask a question, they give a response, and then we want to button it up. Okay, great. Well, then just do step A, B, and C, and drink more water and come talk to me next week. But I think if we train ourselves to ask a couple follow-up questions after our initial question, we're going to dig deeper and understand that person more and be able to partner with them in a more effective way.
And I don't know if you see this and you probably do, especially if you lead with curiosity. It's like on the therapy side or whatever side, like a lot of the problems people present with aren't the problems that are happening. It's like, right. But some people legitimately think it's X, but then through curiosity you get to it's really here. And so I think even just that you're modeling curiosity for that person who's still trying to wrap their head around what they went through and what's going on. And so I think just every situation's different, every person's different,
right.
Giving space for that in your own mind.
Right. I mean, we had a mom who told me about her kid that was constantly getting kicked out of the kids ministry because he was having just explosive meltdowns. And as they drilled in so the teachers are just saying, he just hates it in here. He, he's an angry kid, yada, yada, yada. Turns out, once they started asking questions, it always happened right before they went to small group, which in a church setting is where, a small group of kids get together and talk with the leader. And during the small group, everybody was required to read. And this kid had dyslexia. Mm-hmm. And he was having a meltdown, not because he was angry, not because he was defiant. He was embarrassed that he couldn't read. He didn't know how to communicate to somebody. I can't read like all the other kids in the room. So what he did is he used his behavior to communicate. Mm. And Karen Purvis, who was a pioneer in working with kids from trauma, she says behavior is the language of children who've lost their voice.
I remember you saying that.
And I believe, yes, because I would say that all the time. It's not just children.
Yeah.
Behavior is the language of humans who have lost their voice. Sometimes we're not able to articulate what's going on, and so we are going to show through our behavior that we're nervous or anxious. And it might not look like nervous or anxious. It might look like arrogant or angry.
Towards the end of the book, I'm going to read something you say, and if you want to add an addendum, or if you've changed your mind since completing the book, I'm going to read this, and then if you want to respond to it, if not. But regardless of whether your kids are typical or not, at the end of the day, we all need the same thing, to be loved and feel like we have a purpose. We share the desire to belong and feel like part of the community. My hope is that we can all work together to create spaces like this, spaces to belong, contribute, be part of something bigger than ourselves, and thrive.
I think
if I could detach the mic and drop it, I would, but they might get mad at me.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I think that's it. Yeah. I mean, that's what we want to do. And it's not up to, well, I'll go back. Kids who are neurodivergent and adults who are neurodivergent, their brains are wired differently. And what we're trying to do is make them fit into our neurotypical world. How awesome would it be if we realize that they're going to respond in different ways, or they need different, maybe bright lights are going to just make it impossible for them to have a conversation with us because they're so distracted by the bright light. How awesome would it be if we're constantly looking for ways that we can provide places so everybody can contribute? And if their brain's wired differently, I think we need them even more because they're going to bring a totally different perspective. There was a recent article that I saw on autistics that the government is now using them, and a lot of these individuals were working as baristas, and now they have high-level government clearance, security clearance, because of their autism, they are able to identify patterns that other people aren't.
It's a superpower.
Yes, it's a super. Thank you, Derek. It's a superpower. And we were missing out on that by having them pour coffee. And they interviewed some of these individuals who are saying, wow, I feel like I'm contributing, because everybody wants to contribute, and that they're using their unique gifts, their superpowers. We all have superpowers For some, we're going to need to dig a little deeper, especially because we live in this world where we've got this box that's typical. And if somebody's outside of typical, we often look at it as a deficit rather than a difference. It's just different. It's not wrong. It's not bad.
It's just different.
It's just different. And man, who wants to be around people that are just like them all the time?
Boring.
So boring. But it's comfortable.
Yeah. It's predictable. Mm-hmm. Before we wrap up, tell people how to connect with you, how to stay in touch and stay up to date on kind of what you're up to.
Yeah. KimBotto.com website. You can get on there. You can subscribe. I send out, regular information on new research or tips to engage with, especially people who are different, whether it be due to neurodivergence, disability, or kids who've experienced trauma. That's gonna affect their behavior. So KimBotto.com, you can get all the things, and I'm on all the socials like all the people are.
Well, thank you. Thanks for hopping on here and chatting.
So fun being with you.
Likewise.